Hello, welcome to Deeper Than Dogma. Tonight we are going to be discussing animal rights, or do animals have rights, or what is our ethical responsibility towards animals? You know, regardless of how you look at it, there is a certain relationship that we do share with animals. There are certain animals that we feel obliged to, or we feel terrible if we do bad things too. There is a certain type of relationship that we have with animals. But why? Like, where does this come from? And what is our responsibility in all this? So this is a topic that has been brought up by a few people in the past that we want to kind of discuss, kind of go into, and figured that now would be a good time for it. So to start off, Benny, you're one of the people that want to talk about this. Why is this an important topic to you?
Well, hi. Sokka, if you can screen share me, that would be helpful because I don't remember how to do it. I haven't done it in so long. Is it actually? No, I got it. I think. Screen share. There we go. So, do you see me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, there's a couple things. One was this video, and you should have a screenshot on your. You should be able to see what I'm seeing, and of this. This video they took at a Walmart pork factory, and they,
Sorry, Benny, I'm presenting you. You have to go to the screen share option on the left-hand side there.
Did I not do that?
Yeah, the little one that's with the green arrow, the green screen with the white arrow, sorry. Hit that for screen share.
Did that work?
It's a black screen right now. There you go.
Are we good?
Yeah, now it's good. Oh, it just disappeared again.
Seriously?
There he goes. Now you're there.
All right. Well, I was going to full screen it, but I guess it should be okay. All right. So this is it's disturbing. I mean, what it made me think is that you can see he's got this club. Can you see my mouse arrow? Or I don't know if that's working or not.
But yeah, that works.
You can see he's got this club, and they're just hitting the pigs because they have to herd them around. They have to move them from place to place. So they just hit them on the backs, on the butts, on the wherever. And, yeah, I'm sure they would say, well, this is a 600, 700, 800-pound animal, however big they get. So they have to, they don't feel pain the same way you do, and they have to find ways to move them around. That's fine. I mean, he just got done hitting this one in the head for what didn't look like any reason at all, but he did. You can see them just... this one in the bottom right I just thought was super cute, so I tried to get a nice screenshot of him. But I mean, these animals, if you just imagine that these were not pigs, if you imagine that these were dogs or cats, this would be animal abuse and these people would all be arrested. So I mean, this just makes me wonder, why do we have a certain kind of an obligation to dogs, to where people say, if you have a bunch of dogs held under certain conditions, then you go to prison. You could. I mean, Michael Vick, the famous NFL quarterback, went to prison for having a dogfighting operation. So I mean, there seems to be a strange sort of hypocrisy that goes on concerning animal treatment in our country and other countries as well. You can see there. I don't know if you can see this screen, but he's about to kill this pig. He kills the pig. Pig's writhing in pain, or maybe it's just an autonomic response, but the pig is shaking back and forth, dying, bleeding out, and the other pigs are like looking at this pig and realizing, okay, this pig's dying, so the other two pigs probably realize that they're next, and it's just really messed up. Another thing, I was listening to NPR. There was this you can whoever that is could mute, please. That would be helpful. Okay, so this book is called Pigtails. Barry East Estabrook did an interview on NPR where he talked about the conditions that they live in. Hundreds of pregnant sows into these stalls so tight that they can't even move after they give birth. This is actually before they've given birth, I think. But after they give birth, they're in these stalls. They just stay there all the time, from what he was saying, and they can't even really do anything. They can't have any kind of like motherly relationship with their piglets. They're stuck like this. He was told it was so that they couldn't roll around and accidentally roll on top of one, which seems kind of weird, but that's what he was told. He also said that they have like 10%, something like 10% of these pigs just die of what they would call natural causes, and they have to be shipped out in these trucks filled with dead pigs, and they get ground up into meat and sometimes fed back to the same pigs or fed to other animals. It's turned into different kinds of fertilizers and things like that. This is an interesting thing that just happened a couple weeks ago, is that chimps were first granted personhood rights to two, I think it was in New York, it was two research chimps. And I think this is interesting because it's courts look for precedent. They look for any kind of something that's going on that says, okay, we can move things in this direction because we have legal precedent, and this is legal precedent. If we can say, well, what's the reasoning behind giving chimps certain rights and not giving pigs or dogs or whatever? An interesting thing about the pigs is that one thing, I'll turn off screen share, or somebody can turn it off. Okay, there we go. So I should be back now. Hello. So one of the things that I didn't realize is how smart they are. Like there were some tests. They had pigs doing video games, playing video games. This is where they nuzzle into a joystick and they move the thing around, and they actually were better at this than dogs. And according to certain researchers, some researchers, they said that they are actually smarter than dogs. So the reasons that we give for saying, we value these animals, we value chimps because they're smart, we value dogs because they're familiar and smart. Well, pigs are those things too, but we like bacon, and they're an animal that we farm. So we I mean, I've got bacon in the fridge right now, so like I'm not trying to be, I didn't want to do this hangout to just be judgmental toward people who don't think who want to eat meat. I mean, I eat meat, but I also want to live ethically. I want to encourage, and I want to live a certain kind of a life that isn't, encouraging unnecessary cruelty to animals or humans. So I'll stop with that. But thanks.
Okay, so this brings up the basic crutch here, and that is, what is our ethical responsibility towards animals? Do we have one? If anyone wants to answer that.
Can I begin this?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'll begin by saying what I do believe in with regards to how we ought to treat animals. I believe we as human beings do have moral obligations to animals because we as humans have psychological faculties that do have rights that do give us obligation and recognize the rights in one another, being rational creatures or rational animals. And without getting into the meta-ethics of all of that and just into the applied ethics, I don't think animals have that particular right or those particular properties. They don't possess rights because I don't think they have obligations. Now, with regards to why we ought to have moral obligations to them anyway, that comes from the fact that if you see or if somebody engages with the torturing of animals or is fine, for example, let's take somebody engaging in cockfights, just two chickens torturing each other to the point where not even their meat is good for no reason. Now, if somebody can do that with an animal, and of course if that kind of cognitive process can exist, it could even eventually go to people. For example, with serial killers who start off by torturing small animals as children. These breed bad habits, and of course, in order to engage in good habits with other human beings, we have to extend it to the least among us, which are animals, to the best of our abilities. And it doesn't extend further, for example, down to an insect, for example, because we have houses and whole civilizations that rely upon disturbing the ecosystems of insects. Even the pollution we cause is going to kill animals on that level. But at the same time, we still have to consider the lowering of suffering amongst all beings. So that would be my position overall.
So why do you think that? Why do we have to encourage the lowering of suffering between things that we eat?
Mm-hmm. So with regards to animals, nobody would imprison a pig for eating one of its young. Or not sure if they actually do that, but assuming if they did. Or, for example, two stray dogs getting into a dog fight. Because we realize neither of them have any moral responsibility or cognitive capabilities of their own to recognize that one another has some kind of intrinsic inherent value in them. And of course, because we recognize they have no obligations to one another, we also don't endow them with certain inalienable rights that warrant the treating of such malpractice towards animals with the same extent as doing it towards a human. This is why, in some sense, our ethics can remain, to borrow a term, specious, if you will.
So, is there anybody on the panel here tonight that's actually a vegetarian?
I'm a pescatarian. That's about as close as I can get.
I was briefly once as an experiment, but not for those kinds of, not especially out of concern for animal welfare.
And a pescatarian's mixing meat with fish, right? Like in the same pan.
It's just ocean, isn't it? Anything from the sea, or not whales, but
right.
Fish.
Yeah, you don't eat beef or anything.
Fish
like
and
that.
shellfish, not beef, not pigs, not sheep, right?
Right on. I just wanted to clarify.
I once jokingly referred to that as aquatarian, which is where you only eat water.
And give me a second. So I will message a vegetarian if he has time to jump in.
Can I say something to
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
this situation? With regards to what Benny was showing and how we treat our animals, I think there is this this requirement for the species to essentially profit from the situation, right? So with regards to pigs, we've adapted our animal rights now to essentially minimize the pain involved in the situation, but we are currently fighting a populace that is in demand of these things. So certainly with farmyard creatures, we have this big contention. How do we stop the demand, or how do we essentially make it so we can generate enough for the populace without hindering on the lifestyle of the other animals, which I think is an impossibility because they are stock. How we treat other animals, I don't think, like, dogs in the street and such like that. We don't lock up dogs and such other animals, for harming themselves. I think this is specious. I don't think there's anything intrinsic about it. I just think it's because they aren't affecting our species. If you found if there was a dog or a pig that did attack a human, then we would lock it up. We'd probably kill it. So I don't think there is, like, I think it's just us valuing our own species, or at least the benefit of our species, or sorry, the forwarding of our species over another animal.
Could I speak to that?
Yeah, I'd go after Ozzy as well.
Sure, after Ozzy first, and then we'll go to
If he
Dark.
doesn't say what I'm thinking, because he probably is.
Okay. Well, I don't know. We'll test your psychic abilities here. Well, first, let me echo the sentiments of Maximus. Sorry.
It has to happen at least once a show, by the way. We
Sorry,
wrong.
it's going to be a habit that's going to be hard to break. Yeah, I want to echo those sentiments. I'm of the view that animals, other animals, non-human animals, don't have rights, but that doesn't mean that we don't have obligations to them. And there's a difficulty sort of in our culture. Politically, we live in a rights-based culture where we're concerned that the only way to safeguard protections for anyone or anything is to imagine that it has rights. But you don't always have to invoke rights to protect something, right? A painting, the Mona Lisa doesn't have any rights, right? But you have an obligation not to deface that work of art, right? Something doesn't have to have a right. Right? It doesn't have to be a right-possessing or right-bearing thing for you to have an obligation to not harm it, right? Or for you to have an obligation to assist it. So that's the first thing that I would say. And I agree with Maximus that rights and obligations go hand in hand. They go together hand in glove. I think that something can only be a possessor of rights if it's the kind of thing that can be the possessor of obligations, the bearer of obligations. And that's because I think that rights are something that has to, at least in principle, be exercised or exercisable. A human child isn't able to voice its concerns and its rights, but it's the kind of creature that will at least become that, right? But a pig or a dog is not the kind of thing that's ever going to be able to exercise its rights. It's never going to have obligations to its. It doesn't have obligations to itself or members of its species or us. So I don't think it can be the bearer of rights. But that doesn't mean that because it doesn't have rights that we can do any old damn thing we want. We have obligations because we, being the kinds of creatures that we are, have the cognitive faculties that we have, which include the ability to understand the misery and suffering that we can inflict on other organisms when we understand the predictable consequences of our actions. And so that entangles us in certain obligations towards other creatures that, if they don't have the capacity to return the favor, at least have the capacity to suffer. And so I think we have obligations to them, even though that they don't have rights. Now, with respect to something like a rabid dog, why do you put a rabid dog down, right? But you can't just kill any old dog you want, right? Well, the reason you can't kill any old dog you want is because we have obligations to them, not because they have rights. If there was a right, the thing about a right is a right trumps other considerations. If I say, hey, that's my right, too bad. It's my right. It's a trump card. I can say, it doesn't matter what the other considerations are. A right is a right. It trumps other considerations. And so if dogs had a right to life, for instance, well, you couldn't just kill it. You need a good reason, an especially good reason. And the fact that it's rabid and therefore sick and not in control of itself, that wouldn't be a reason to kill it, right? No, the reason we kill dogs that are rabid, that have rabies or something like that, or that are in the habit of harming people or something like that, or have a history of attacking people, is that they are a danger to us. And so we have obligations to them, but we have obligations to ourselves and other people, not just to them. And they don't have rights that trump our other obligations. So I think that's why we can, in some instances, say it's perfectly acceptable to kill this animal that we consider a pet, but not that animal that I consider a pet. I hope that addresses that concern.
Okay. Darius, I just want to know how close did that come to what you were going to say?
Okay, I think it was Alex that just said something and about valuing our species. For example, if dogs did go around killing us, or if a dog did go, kill us, we would put it down, for example. But I think I would say, in terms of us eating meat, for example, I would say, well, we do spend, say, billions of dollars feeding these animals to obviously keep them nourished. And I came in late, so I'm not sure if anyone has brought this up yet. So if they have, you can cut me off. It's okay. But we spend millions of dollars, even billions, just keeping these things alive, and even just like the crops and stuff. But like, if we didn't do that and we got this money, say, used it for our species in general, you wouldn't be killing these animals, and you could still survive as a species just as well. You could go around possibly feeding malnourished people, maybe give more to charity. So I think that in itself is a pretty good reason why we should stop doing what we're doing with animals. Obviously, it is unrealistic to just cut it off all at once. I think it would be anarchy if we just got rid of all animals and just said, no, we can't eat them anymore. It's done. It's over. It'd be like getting rid of chocolate. It would be crazy. But yeah, that's just my thought on that. So if anyone wants to comment, please.
Well, I'm gonna let Benny answer. Go next, before it goes too far. But just on that point, is one of the things I challenge you on would be, for example, that there are certain environments out there where the hunting or the of the animals have become part of the natural process of things. That you, for example, with the cod fishing, for example, or whatever, is that when you these animals live now in an area where their numbers have adjusted to the amount that they are fished per year. That to stop fishing them could actually be damaging to the ecosystem because there might become too many of them. How do you balance that stuff out now, where there are certain ecosystems that have adjusted to the fact that these animals are hunted?
Yeah, I think that would be. To be honest, I think that goes back to when I said somewhat where I suggested that you obviously wouldn't just stop doing it altogether. I think it would be very difficult to obviously help this ecosystem out and maybe fix it the way it was before. I don't know. But what I do know in terms of, say, take lions, for example, there are very, very few lions, but they're not, so to say, on the endangered species list, mainly because there's so few of them, because since they're predators, very high up in the food chain, but we would need more food for them, essentially. So, but if there was too many lions, it'd be like there would be more food have to spread out for them, kind of like that.
Well, and one last point I want to bring up is, for example, the domestication of the cow is a process that took tens of thousands of years. It's been around for a very long time. The cows in the form that they are now cannot survive in the wild by themselves. Regardless of whether we stop eating beef tomorrow, perchance, that we can't just say, okay, release all the cows and let them go on their merry way. These are creatures now that are domesticated. We now have a responsibility for these animals. That so how do we thin out the numbers? Do we just keep a couple cows here and there in a zoo? Because to just disregard them and say, okay, great, they're on their own, is forcing a species now into extinction.
Yeah, I think I would agree that it would probably be very unethical of us if we just stopped and just let them walk around out the farms. I think that would be it'd probably be worse, to be honest. I would agree with that. How you would fix it? Yeah, I agree. It probably would take a long time, but sure. I don't see why that's a reason not to do it. I think that's a good reason to start doing it, especially now, because if we just leave it off, I'm not sure if all of this is very sustainable in the long run either. So that's all I have to say for that anyway.
Okay, Benny, you wanted to respond to the point on obligations there, I believe, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're getting strung out now, so now I've got comments I could make about everything. But,
I know. Sorry.
No, I mean, well, the thing you said about the cattle that exist today aren't anything like the steers that they had hundreds of years ago. Even, I mean, you don't even have to go back that far. Modern cattle aren't anything like what our ancestors had. And that the animals that we have now are animals that would not even exist if we weren't farming them. That that the pigs that we have, the cattle that we have, the chickens that we have, these animals wouldn't even exist. These animals only exist because we farmed them, and that's why we have millions of chickens and cows and sheep and goats and everything else. So it's kind of interesting to think that. Well, for one thing, we are omnivores by nature. We have been for hundreds of thousands of years, probably millions of years. We've been eating meat as a sustenance, as a food source, and but we've just gotten so darn efficient at it. We've gotten really good at it. I mean, when we see things like those pig crates that I was showing, I mean, this is just to meet the demands of 7 billion people. You need to do things like this, And when we actually see it, when we see the stuff we're not wanting to see, it's shocking and sometimes horrifying. But that's not the question I wanted to say. I wanted to ask Ozzy about the thing about rights and obligations. I see that there's a link, but I'm concerned that it's not more semantic than anything else, because the rights of a human, like my rights, means that other people have obligations to me. Like if I have the right to life, if I have the right to free speech, that means my government needs to has obligations to me, right? And that's what it means for me to have rights. And I think that's what it means. And if that's,
they have to be honored by. There has to be somebody else that honors those things.
Right. And so if the animals don't have rights, but we have obligations to them, then the net effect seems like it might end up just being the same, to where our behavior is actually what we're concerned with. We're concerned with not what they do, but what we do. And so if we say, well, they don't have rights, but we have obligations to them, that basically just would be the same as granting them rights. I mean, what would be the difference? I guess that's my question, is what would be the difference between saying they have rights, they have the right to a certain type of treatment, versus we have the obligation to give them that treatment?
Sure, there isn't much of a difference. I mean, it is kind of semantic, but this is but semantics is everything here. If everybody has an obligation towards a person, okay, it's exactly as if that person has a right, right? Because that person if they're in a position to know about it, will be able to say, hey, you have an obligation towards me that you're not fulfilling, right? Now, animals can't do that. Okay, other animals can't do that. Okay, they can't exercise this, and so that's why they can't. That's why they say they don't have a right. You have to be able to exercise a right, I think, in principle, for the word right to be fully meaningful here. But I mean, if everyone has an obligation to some entity, then it's exactly as if it had a right. But that's the point. We don't have to confer rights. We don't have to enshrine rights. We don't have to say that an animal is a right-bearing creature and then imagine that it has to. Geez, now we're going to say that they have to have obligations too. No, we want to be able to say that no, they don't have obligations, not to themselves, not to each other, and certainly not to us. They don't have obligations. We have obligations, and that safeguards for them protections that are every bit as good as if they had rights that they could exercise, but they don't have rights that they could exercise. But the fact that they don't have rights that they can't exercise doesn't mean we don't have obligations and that we can't safeguard them. So yeah, I mean, it might seem like, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. It might seem purely like it's semantic, but in that sense, this is semantic in the right sense, in that we're making an analytical distinction here. That this is a difference that makes a difference. We want to be able to distinguish between things that really do have rights and things that don't have rights, but nevertheless get protection. Right? The Mona Lisa, that's why I give the example of the Mona Lisa. No one is even tempted to think that the Mona Lisa has a right to exist and not be defaced. Right? It wouldn't matter if it didn't belong to anybody. I mean, a cave painting, we could discover a cave painting, right, or a piece of art on another planet, right, and we would say, whoa, don't anybody do anything. And you wouldn't be able to say of a piece of art on another planet created by another race that it's their property, that we're respecting their property rights. We don't have to invoke property rights or of any kind for any people to say that something ought to be safeguarded and protected, and we have an obligation to safeguard and protect it. So that's the point of the distinction.
Considering that
okay,
I also
hang on a second, please,
Sorry,
Max.
one second, Max. Alex going to go, and then I just want to respond to what Ozzy said as well there.
Okay, yeah. So, like on this idea of rights, it seems. What would you say? What would you say to if I would say that when a wolf defends itself, it is acting upon its right to survive, on its right to live, just because it can't vocalize like its desire for survival. It still obviously has some belief in there that it should live. Hence, it defends itself. So I don't see how. It seems like with domesticated animals, all we have done is removed essentially desires along the way, like this desire to hunt or the desire to be confrontational. So what are our rights other than us asserting our desire, other than asserting what we believe we should have?
Oh, are you asking me, Alex?
Well, in general, it's just so I can flesh out the idea for myself. So yeah, Ozzy, if you have an answer, please.
Yeah, sure. It has nothing to do with being able to speak. It has to do with being able to understand that you're a creature that has obligations and have obligations. You have to be able to have obligations and at least be able to understand in principle that you have obligations. And in the case of wolves, they don't understand that they have obligations and they don't honor any obligations. And that's why they don't have rights. So it has nothing to do with merely having desires and being able to act. And it has nothing to do with whether or not you can speak. So
why would you, sorry, I'm going to stop you with that then. Why do you see pack mothers defending their brood essentially?
Oh, they just desire to do it. They have an instinct to do it. We have instincts as well, but there are things that we do not just out of instincts. There are things we do out of obligation.
So you would then say that they hold no obligation. So see that confuses me. Why would they keeping their young alive? Why would they keep their young alive?
They keep their young alive because they have an instinct to do it, for the same reason that they eat when they're hungry and they run when they're scared and they give chase when they see prey.
Okay.
They're not
okay.
doing it out of any sense of moral duty. They're not doing it out of a sense that it would be wrong of me or morally negligent of me to do this.
Okay, then I would then I'll end with this, which would be at what point is the desire then does the desire become an obligation?
It's an obligation when you're doing it for that reason, out of that moral consideration. Right? The reason, the intention, is what matters.
So this hinges upon whether or not animals have a moral recognition of their own species or any other.
It hinges specifically on an organism having the ability to understand the predictable consequences of its own actions upon the welfare and the mental states of other organisms. And we're able to do that, and perhaps maybe chimps are able to do it in some attenuated form. We might discover someday another species that can do it. Perhaps someday we'll create robots or thinking machines that can do that, and then those will be things that can have obligations and be the bearers of rights. But presently, as far as we know, no other non-human species has those capacities, which is why I think that we don't think that they have obligations, which is why we don't blame them, morally speaking, when they do bad things. When a bear turns into a manhunter in a national park, we go and kill it. We're not doing it because it's a murderer. We're doing it to protect ourselves, strictly speaking, not to punish it, because we understand that it's just not capable of those kinds of moral deliberations. It's just acting out of its purely animal nature without any kind of moral consideration. So having certain kinds of cognitive faculties is a difference that makes a difference, morally speaking, and I think that translates into whether or not something can have obligations, and therefore whether or not something can have rights. That's how I see it.
Kevin, you've been waiting very patiently here. I know that you wanted to get a word in here as well.
Well, I guess I'd have to pull it back a little bit because I wanted to comment about something that Ben said about the efficiency with regards to what we're doing with animals, and I wanted to challenge him a little bit. Is that when you try to define efficiency when it comes to economic efficiency, then I would agree with that statement. However, these captive farms that millions and millions of chickens and cows and stuff get filtered through and we slaughter them. The environmental damage is insane when it comes to these farms. So if you take that into account, they're actually very badly efficient. So just wanted to say that much.
Yeah, okay. You're overthinking it. I mean, really, I'm just talking about like ancient humans could have gone out. We have this picture of Paleolithic man or whatever going out. 5 men from the tribe go out with spears, and they all come back with like massive amounts of meat. But hunting was actually a really unreliable way to get your food. The foraging was a much more reliable way to feed your people. So I mean, you'd have anybody who was, it wasn't always the men going out to hunt, but you'd have a lot of the time women and children would forage for berries or whatever they could find, and that's really what you'd be living off of, and you'd just get the protein whenever you could get it. And so what I mean by efficiency is just that we've a big factory operation raising and then slaughtering pigs or cows is it always works, and yeah, in terms of energy expended, you could go out all day. You could literally go out all day. You can do this right now. You can go out, spend your whole day trying to hunt an animal and get nothing. So I'm really just talking about in terms of time and energy spent rather than economics, which there was none in the past.
Well, one small point to that is that your analogy that you're using is small hunter-gatherer tribes, and I understand what you're talking about, but they are hunting within their environmental limits. They're not raping the land around them and causing their own homestead to be essentially strip mined, whereas essentially what we're doing right now is just the opposite. So
that may be related. It's just not really the point I was making, but I think there's some validity to what you're saying. I'm not sure. The raping the land language is a little bit, whatever.
I know that Ozzy wanted to jump in here again on that kind of the topic, but I just actually had one more question about the rights versus obligations thing, and then I promise we can move off that. doesn't it seem a little arbitrary though in how we're assigning where our obligations are to what animals? That I mean, we demonstrate an obligation to protect, or some animals like dogs, to a certain extent, even some of the food that we have, some of the stock that where we get our food from. But yet we don't extend this to wasps or other animals that we view as nuisances.
Could I answer that in terms of where the line ought to be drawn?
Sure.
Okay. Well, in terms of human beings, or what would eventually grow to become human beings, we recognize as humans we have a collective capability of having a cognitive function, which allows us to process and analyze when we have a moral obligation or an obligation towards another thing or creature, be it human or non-human. This is why we can be rendered praiseworthy or blameworthy, because we have the potential of using this faculty. This faculty has the end of actually drawing this out for us, whether that end is put in there teleologically or teleonomically, however you wish to
ask
put that
something?
out.
Can I ask
Just
something
a minute, Xbox.
Yeah, no problem.
Whereas animals do not have this capability. So whereas we can recognize our obligation towards them, we notice that they can't have an obligation towards us, and we act as if they had rights, as Ozzy would have said.
My quick question on it is, and I still see kind of like an arbitrariness to it, that you're saying that rights and obligations only come from having that cognitive function. So it's an emergent property of a cognitive function.
Yes, it's an emerging property or capability or capacity of the function. So it's what the function does, essentially. It functions towards the end of, recognizing when we do or when we do not have obligations. Am I lagging to anyone?
Nope.
You sound okay to me.
Soccer might have froze up, maybe.
Oh, okay. Would you like to respond there?
Yeah, I think someone on the side was going to go after you, and I butted in with the questions. Let me see, was it Darius or Benny?
Well, I had a quickie. Ozzy might be lagging, so I can ask Max, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Just the thing I just wrote, the rights and obligations. If you can't have obligations without having rights, or if they're linked in this way that Ozzy has described, then what do you do with? I mean, is that only at a population level, like at a species level, like something like humanity as a whole, or can you break it down to the individual? Because there are individual humans who can't have obligations because they're unable to act. They're in a coma, or they're born with crippling disabilities that disallow them the ability to follow through on any obligation we might try to give them. And yet we would still say that they have whatever human rights anyone else has, right? I mean, except for maybe speech, because they can't speak. But I mean,
well, actually,
is that making sense? Okay.
Yes, that does make sense. And this is actually debatable even amongst human beings. For example, there's a reason abortion is a touchy subject matter, because you're balancing two very important rights that we recognize for human beings. One is something's right to live, and the other is a woman's right to choose and decide to have autonomy for her body. That's not easily parsed out.
Sure.
And of course, something that comes into play is the baby's inability to factor in or have a choice in the matter. So that's something that does come in. Euthanasia is another reason, or another example, where this is heavily weighted. So it's not an easy issue across the board. I myself take a particular position. I'm very Catholic and Christian in my background, so of course my ethics are going to be geared towards more of a life end. Whereas I believe other people who take my same position might argue that it's not on my side. So even within my own camp, there's a bit of a divide. So, but overall, I think that human beings, being metaphysically universal, I think that it applies across the board, whether it's to children or whether it's people who are in comas, whether it's people who are cripply ill, who we think might have the right to exercise a choice within their own account, euthanasia, or even with the unborn. So I think it would spam across the board because I take a very rigid metaphysical position on what is a human being. Whereas people on the other camp, I can't really speak to that position, but even within our own camp, there is a wide veracity of debate. So it's not a simple answer, at least coming from where I'm being represented.
Right on.
Before we kind of move this on past this idea of obligations and rights, because I'm pretty sure we could talk on this for much longer. Does anybody else have anything that they want to add on those topics before we kind of move on to something else?
Yeah, I think Ozzy had something to add on the primitive hunting that they were speaking on. If you wanted to add that, Ozzy.
Actually, it's a bit tangential. Maybe I'll leave it alone, except to say that when it comes to primitive hunting, we sort of there's a myth out there, sometimes called the myth of the conserving aboriginal, that sort of so-called primitive peoples or aboriginal peoples, people who hunt in traditional ways, can never sort of overhunt and exceed the carrying capacity of their ecological niches and environments, and that's a fiction. I mean, if you look at the sort of the story of human migration, of our evolution and our migration out of Africa, the story of human migration and the spread out of Africa across Europe and into the Americas eventually, is the story of the extinction of large terrestrial megafauna. I mean, where we go, we have a tendency to exterminate large species, and I'm talking about tens and hundreds of thousands of years ago. So it's simply not true that and nobody was actually saying this, but in case it was implied, or in case anyone comes away thinking that, it's simply not true that today, because of the massive efficiency, we're able to exterminate things. Well, yes, that part is true, but it's not. The obverse isn't true, that therefore our ancestors, or that native and aboriginal peoples with traditional native hunting practices are sort of conserving and can't sort of degrade their environments and completely overhunt. I mean, that has happened, right? There's this idea that people just go out and hunt only what they need. And I mean, there's a place in Canada out west called Head Smashed In Buffalo Jump. It's a buffalo jump where the native Indians used to herd and cause stampedes of buffalo, and the bones at the foot of that cliff are 13 feet deep. They were not killing only what they needed. The only safe way to kill a buffalo when you have stone tools and spears is to get them stampeding, running away from you, going the other way. And that doesn't mean killing one of them. That means killing them by the thousands. There's way more meat there than even a large village of 300 people could ever use, and more hides than they could use, more bone than they could ever use. So, I mean, primitive people killed organisms any old damn way they could, but that's because it was dangerous to do it. Now, with the technology at our disposal, we can hunt and fish and that sort of thing much more humanely. And because we're in a position to understand the predictable consequences of our actions, we should do it humanely. We shouldn't do it the way they did it. We should do it as humanely as we can. So, if you're sort of an angler or a sports hunter or something like that, hunting for meat or something like that, you have an obligation, I would say, to do so humanely.
So, I was going to take it to another topic. We'll jump ahead to this one first off. The entire concept of hunting. Where do we find the ethics in hunting? Where do we draw the line in there? I mean, a lot of you can bring up the fact that some people still hunt for meat. Some people might still hunt for survival to a certain extent. But what about trophy hunting? I mean, do we have any? Is there any ethical problems against that? Should we be taking a position completely against trophy hunting or catch and release fishing?
Well, I have some opinions on that. Shanna's smiling because she's heard my opinions on that. I don't know to what extent she agrees or disagrees. It's a conversation we've had before. I'm an angler myself. I fish. And when my wife and I go canoeing, we go fishing. I don't practice catch and release. I don't go out and catch a fish and then unhook it and throw it in the water and catch another fish and do that. What we do is we fish for food. Instead of going to the store and buying a fish, which we sometimes do, we think it's more humane to just go out and catch a fish. When you consider how fish are caught in nets and dragged into boats and left to to die of anoxia, pressed up against other fish, thrown in the hold of a ship, and then salted and stuff like that. It's a horrific way for fish to die. Being caught on a hook is not a happy way to meet its end either, but it's a lot more humane than commercial fishing. But so when we go fishing, we go out and I bend back the barbs on my hooks so that I can easily release the hook if I need to, if the fish is out of season, it's the wrong species of fish, or if the fish is too small. And we fish only for what we're going to eat. So, and I'm allergic to fish, so when we fish, we're fishing usually for one decent-sized fish or two decent-sized fish for my wife. And if we go out for 2 hours, great. And if we go out and in the first 5 minutes or in the first cast we hook a fish, fishing's done for the day. I kill the fish, I dispatch the fish as efficiently as I can, and then it goes on ice. I don't keep it on a stringer for hours for it to languish and suffer. I try to be as humane as possible when I fish, and I try to take as few lives as possible. And I think that the practice of catch and release is actually quite cruel. People catch fish, and then they release them, and they catch fish, and they release them, and really what they're doing, if they're not eating them, or eating a small fraction of them, if they eat 2 or 3, but they're catching 20 fish in a day, what they're doing is they're tormenting fish all day for their recreation. And I think if you are tormenting fish for recreation, I think that your moral sensibilities have been a little bit disturbed. You may have lost sight of the fact that you're dealing with an organism that can feel and suffer. And
similar
terrified.
to, similar to like running of the bulls. Like, why are we just tormenting this animal for fun? There should be a better reason.
Right, exactly. I don't think one should hunt strictly for recreation. Strictly for recreation. It's okay if it is recreational. I mean, I enjoy fishing. I'm not going to lie and pretend I don't enjoy fishing. That I don't get a thrill when I feel that strike on my rod and I hook into a big bass that flips in the water, and I enjoy the thrill of reeling it in. I'm not going to be a hypocrite here and pretend I don't enjoy that. Of course, I think we are a hunting species. I think it is natural and enjoyable and satisfying to stalk and kill or trap an animal. I think that we're sort of wired that way. So of course I enjoy it, but I don't think that one should just make a leisure activity out of doing something that you know is harming animals when there's no other good involved. And I think it's okay, for instance, to teach children to fish so that they will do this and they will acquire these values and these humane practices, which means you're going to have to do some recreational fishing simply to not only be doing recreational fishing so that they can get to the point where they can fish responsibly. So there's a cost-benefit analysis that has to be done here. It's not a sort of all or none thing. Anyway, I hope that clarifies my position on that. Oh, and with respect to trophy hunting, I think that is just hunting for vanity. I mean, if you're hunting an animal whose hide you're not going to need or want, whose meat you're not going to need or want, and you're just doing it so you can take a picture of yourself holding up your 6-point buck or next to a giraffe or something like that, that is vanity, and that is a terrible reason to hurt and kill an animal. I think there are commendable reasons to do that, but that's not among them.
Jenna, how are you doing? Good to see you tonight.
I'm good. How are you?
Great. Would you like to respond to Ozzy?
I completely disagree with Oz.
Okay.
Completely. That's it. I mean,
okay.
He says that.
Can elaborate?
He says that we know that we're torturing them. That we know that we're doing. I don't think that that's. I think that you are acting like that's a done and sealed case, that it's over. No, I don't think that's the case. I think that there might be a decent argument that could be mounted for that, but I don't think it's shut and done like you're saying that it is, at all.
Well, I'm willing to defend that, but just consider the risk if you're wrong, right?
If I'm wrong, I'm still not that concerned. Even if they are experiencing a little bit of pain, I'm not torturing fish. I'm not. Okay, they don't experience pain in the same sense that we do. We're giving them these human emotions and these human experiences.
Wait a minute.
Okay, yes.
You know this? You know this? You're making it sound like it's a fact now.
Really? Really? Are you prepared to argue that fish have a theory of mind and they experience pain in the same way that we do?
They don't need a theory of mind to experience pain.
The way that we do?
there are pains that we can experience only because we have a theory of mind, like
Hang on a second.
psychological
Shanna,
anguish.
Right, but the fish
Yeah,
don't.
Shanna, with that qualification, we can no longer make any relation to any other species.
Right.
That's fine.
Is pain the major
think that's
barrier
cool.
for when it's okay to treat something one way versus another? What I mean is, like, if we found out, for instance, this is just kind of, I'm off the top of my head here, that say some particular single-celled organism could feel pain exactly as we do, would that mean that we should treat them as we do other people, to treat them, to make sure not to harm them in any way unless it was for food? Because obviously, single-celled organisms, we kill them every day in the masses with all kinds of disinfectants and whatnot. Should we suddenly start acting differently if we knew that they felt pain the exact same way we do?
If it was avoidable.
Pain really the threshold? Is it pain and
If it was
intelligence?
avoidable, everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people act like
So
Look,
maybe I
we're a part of nature. We're in the food chain. Okay, that's how this works.
maybe
We're
I
going to
can,
kill things, and things are going to
Hang on.
suffer.
Hang on.
um,
Hang on, Max. Hang on. Before we get too far away from it, a quick question on it is, how come the measuring stick is our pain? Is anything that is identical to our pain?
it's because that's pretty much the only example we have, considering we
I guess it's the only ruler we have available to us. Yeah.
It works on our empathy.
introspection.
Well,
It
but
has
if
to be
I don't agree with
it's unlikely that any of them are identical to our experience. That's not what's needed.
Well,
yeah,
actually,
you can kick your dog all day long on that argument.
I want to respond to
hold on. The reason I ask is because you don't feel pain the same way I feel pain. So to make that argument, I'm not sure how you're making that as the standard.
It's not the standard, but it is a very important question to ask. If a creature can't feel pain at all, if I'm going out and harvesting oysters or something, if I go out and harvest shellfish, I have no reason to think that they can feel any sort of pain at all. They don't have a nervous system. A fish has it's a vertebrate. It has a nervous system. It's a relatively, I hate to use the term, but like highly evolved creature. Okay, it's not a barnacle. Okay, so if I go out and pull a clam out of the ocean, we just need to recognize these gradients, these differences between something like a barnacle to a fish, and then from a fish up to something like a cow. There are
infers the pain.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're different. They're qualitative differences. Yeah, sure. Go ahead, JD.
I want to respond to Shanna. You mentioned that we're part of the animal kingdom, or we're part of the circle of life, I guess you could say. However,
I'm sorry,
we have-
JD.
Yeah.
I know something about kingdoms. Okay, who's their king?
Don't go there.
checkmate.
Oh, no.
Stop! I'm going to lose the train of thought again.
Sorry, go ahead.
Anyway, we're part of the animal kingdom. However, we have I'm just going to use the word evolved. We have evolved an ability, reasoning, that can put us above it, so we can cause less harm than we would if we did not have it. And
Also,
as people who have developed the ability to reason the way we have, do we have a responsibility to act to basically cause as little harm as possible? Now we're capable of, especially with modern society in first world countries, everyone can live off a diet entirely of vegetables, beans, things that do not feel pain. So do we have an obligation to do that? And if not, why not?
Well, no.
Keep in mind that I don't do this. I love meat.
Yeah, I do too. I'm perfectly okay with eating meat because I'm not I'm an omnivore.
Hippie?
But just an interesting side note, though, there are some people that would argue that plants do experience pain in some sense. So have fun with that.
Go ahead. Oh, okay, go ahead. Sorry.
I think that we have an obligation not to be cruel. I think we have an obligation not to, just not to be cruel. There's no point in that. We can kill them, but lions and elephants and zebras can all drink at the same watering hole when nobody's trying to eat. They're not cruel to each other, and we could do the same.
I've seen cats are actually quite cruel. I don't think they intend it. They don't have the intention of cruelty, but they do, in fact, act cruelly. They will play with their prey.
Well, they're indifferent. They're morally indifferent.
They're morally indifferent. Yeah, they don't have more reasoning skills. We're applying. That's again what I was saying earlier. We're taking what we do and applying that to them. Can
you be cruel without knowing it, though?
No, I don't think so. No, you can be indifferent and insouciant and ignorant, but cruelty, I think, is doing something.
It requires intent.
Right.
Well, no. It doesn't have to require the intention to harm. It just has to satisfy what was called the mens rea condition. You have to understand what you're doing and not care. Now, I think what happens with a lot of anglers is they buy into an idea that's very, very popular among anglers, that fish don't feel pain. I was told this my whole life. And there isn't a good argument for thinking that fish don't feel pain. I think there's an argument to say that, well, fish probably don't feel as much pain as we do. They can perhaps don't suffer it as exquisitely as we do. But I mean, they appear to have the relevant neurophysiology. It's not an open and shut case. I mean, a lobster, for instance, is very, very hard to tell. Probably not, but maybe. Clams almost certainly not, right? But a fish, very probably, and they certainly engage in pain, all the relevant pain avoidance behaviors. It's just that they're marine animals, and they don't have vocal cords, so they don't scream, But if they could scream, they probably would. They certainly engage in all the kinds of pain avoidance behaviors that you would expect an organism to engage in if they could feel pain. But I also don't think that organisms have to be able to feel pain as exquisitely as we do for that to register as a factor that counts. Maybe my dog doesn't feel pain as exquisitely as I do, but that's not a reason for me to kick it all day long, right? Or to derive my amusement from kicking it all day long or something like that, supposing that were amusing to me. And so I think with now, Shanna's point is not that, just to counter Xbox's objection, Shanna's point was not that we are the measure in the sense that only things that feel pain exactly like us are worthy of our moral consideration where cruelty is concerned. But there's a sliding scale here, right? And because of evolution, or different things along the phylogenetic scale are going to be able to suffer more or less than other things, right? For instance, I mean, the reason I think it's okay to sort of kill an animal in hunting is that I don't think it can suffer its own death in the same way. The prospect that my life can be cut short is horrific to me. But I mean, my dog can't even conceive of its mortality, right? It avoids, doing things that will result in its death, but it doesn't think of itself as a mortal creature, as far as we can tell, and it doesn't try to prolong its life. It doesn't take steps to prolong its life and its health or anything like that. It's not concerned that its life might be cut short, and so, in other words, it values its life less than we do. It can't value its life as much as we do. A fish can't value its life as much as we do, and that's a difference that makes a difference. Just imagine, why don't we care about plants? Why is it okay to mow your lawn? All right, you're taking life all day long when you're mowing your lawn, right? You're killing hundreds of thousands of organisms a second when you're mowing your lawn. Why are you not concerned about it? It's because there's nothing that is like to be a blade of grass. It doesn't care. But supposing a blade of grass could suffer, okay, but it didn't care about its life. Or supposing dogs could suffer, which they can, but they didn't care whether they lived or died. Now, it's almost an impossibility, because any organism that didn't care if it lived or died wouldn't stick around under natural selection for very long, because it wouldn't engage in the relevant behaviors to avoid being killed. But if an organism didn't care about whether it lived or died, if it didn't value its own life at all, I don't think that we would need to care about it either, right? It would be wrong to make it suffer needlessly, but there would be nothing wrong with taking its life. And I think that organisms differ in their ability to suffer and experience and anticipate their own death, and be morally concerned about their own death, or rather concerned about their own death, and that imposes different moral restrictions. And I think that's why the taking of animal lives is relaxed for us, whereas the taking of a human life is really bad. But taking an animal's life, I just don't think that that's a terrible thing.
If I could bring up something someone said.
Let me throw JD, let me throw out there, since he was rebutting or at least addressing what I was saying. I would have to say I disagree. I'm not going to get into a big argument of why, but it leads to more gray areas that I don't think need to be there. But we can discuss it some other time.
I did want to say, someone mentioned the side chat. I think obviously I think it was either joking or at least half joking, where I said, why should we not? What things? What organisms should be off the table? And he said stuff that's cute. Well, the thing is, we smile. However, if you were to say, I'm gonna just a little thought experiment. If you were to imagine me grabbing the cat sitting behind me here and lift him up and slice his throat open, start draining him in front of you, and start skinning him in order to start cooking him. Most people here, I already see Shanna cringing there. It's a horrifying thought. However, me doing that to a fish, I doubt very many people would bat an eye.
I actually.
Of course, the further down, as far as the way we judge things, if I saw we do it to a slug, like who gives a crap? So. Should cuteness actually be a factor? Given
No.
that there is clearly an emotional response to that. However, I can't think of a reason.
Well, I think that Max has a response here. I'm going to let him do it, but then I want to address the question as well.
Okay, my one response is I personally wouldn't care. I really just don't like cats.
Well, make it a dog. Everyone loves dogs.
I do love dogs.
I think one of the other things too is that when we're talking about the meat that we consume, that at least along the lines of chicken, pork, and beef, like I brought up earlier, we're talking about something that has been domesticated for a very long time. That these animals have almost been shaped to fit what we find favorable in taste, for example. The reason why we use those animals is because generally they taste good. Now, I mean, I'm pretty sure that somewhere along the line, if someone had tried koala, and koala was absolutely, great, that then, there could be an argument, or you'd see, that people would probably be going out and getting koala meat. It could be a delicacy. But I think that by this point in time in our species, I think that we've probably ate and sampled most animals. I think the ones that we eat are not necessarily just the ones that are the easiest for us to get, but also the ones that over time we have preferred.
Shanna, I'm just looking at the side chat. Is it possible we could reduce our own fear to simply a survival instinct? I mean, it could reduce to that if you think of it that way. We've evolved. Ours has just gotten. We've gotten a slightly different way to try and keep us alive when stuff tries to harm us, and end our existence early. But they're both results of evolution. We both have the same kind of starting point, and
it's actually
fish have a different kind of. They don't need advanced cognitive function, but the goal is the same. They're trying not to die. Now, the fact they aren't aware that they're trying not to die, does that matter? Well,
it matters because it means that I'm not psychologically terrorizing the fish.
But you would be harming another organism for fun, even if the harm wasn't the goal.
Yeah, and I usually use another organism to get that organism to taunt.
So you're harming two organisms.
Yeah, and one species using another species to terrorize another species.
Two different. It's horrible.
Well, I'm pretty sure worms do not feel pain or fear or any of that.
Oh, well, really?
There's not a lot of neurophysiology in a worm.
There's not a lot in a fish either.
There's a lot more in a fish. I mean,
well, let me ask.
So how do we draw the line? That's what we're not saying, guys. I mean,
go down the tree.
there is no way. There's no principled way to draw the line. Caution.
Sort of theory of mind. That's what I think.
Precautionary principle. You're saying Ozzy is saying we should use the precautionary principle. We should say we should err on the side of caution. We should say give them maybe more credit than what they're due.
No, not more credit than they're due. More credit. Only as much credit as they seem to be given their behavior.
Well, like I said,
then why don't we do that for plants? The blades of grass that you were talking about. Why don't we do that for that? That beautiful smell that we smell when we cut grass, we all love so much. That's them letting out panic chemicals to alert the grass blades that chaos is coming. They're literally screaming in chemical form to not be cut. Other plants do very similar things. We've talked about this.
Yeah, I have a rebuttal.
There's endless data to suggest that plants react in the same way. That they react.
Not in the same way.
Well, let's move it up. Let's go the other direction. Let's move it.
Let Ozzy say what he wanted to say.
Yeah, I want Ozzy to respond, and then JD, you could throw in your comment to that.
Respond to the plant business?
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How can you respond when I didn't finish what I was going to say?
Oh, okay, please finish.
Sorry,
No,
please
it's
finish.
fine. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Please finish.
No, I just wanted to point that out because I'm wondering. You go right.
I've had this conversation.
Okay. All right. Yeah, look. There are all kinds of survival mechanisms that organisms are going to engage in that are going to be preserved by natural selection that have nothing to do with that organism having subjective mental states. Okay, so I mean, plants, for instance, people think that plants are just sort of decorations, right? But they're not. They're aggressive living things. Plants actually don't just take in nutrients through their roots. They actually leach out chemicals into the soil that inhibit the growth of other plants around them to make sure that the competition is not too close and robbing the nutrients from the soil around them. The plants aren't trying to do this, right? This is just a chemical effect. And similarly,
really, that's done and dusted, huh? That's settled.
That's all we need to posit. We needn't posit more to explain the phenomenon. Okay. Now, in the case of plants leaching out chemicals that have an effect on other plants when they are being injured, if that actually helps their neighbors and their neighbors share their genes, then that too is explained by natural selection, right? This is exactly why we see Belding ground squirrels that will call out when there's a hawk overhead to alert others in their colonies because they're genetic relatives, right? This is actually readily explainable in terms of natural selection. You don't have to posit that there is a mind and anything feeling there. Now, maybe plants feel, but if they feel, what that means is that there's a way for organisms to feel without having any neurophysiology. But as far as we can tell, every mental state that we know exists in us or in any other organism, as far as we can tell and discern, requires a certain amount of neurophysiology, rather specific neurophysiology. The neurophysiology of pain is starting to be fairly well understood, which is why we're able to say, well, probably not in lobsters, probably in fish, almost certainly not in worms and clams and barnacles and things like that, definitely in chimps and dolphins like us, right? As we start to map out the relevant neurophysiology, we're able to figure out where along the phylogenetic scale things are feeling pain and how much pain they can feel and that sort of thing. But in the case of plants, they don't have any kind of neurophysiology. So that would be my rebuttal.
All right. I want to ask.
Hang on.
Okay. After Shannon, then JD, okay?
Hang on. Look, first of all, for the fish thing, they don't have a neocortex, okay? That's where the pain's processed in the sense that we're talking about.
No, pain. No, it's not in the neocortex. No, pain is not. Pain is also processed in the neocortex. Everything is processed in the neocortex, but you don't need a neocortex to feel pain. Our pain system is very, very ancient. It's like right there, deep down in the reptile part of our brain, not in that higher cortical region.
Oh, okay. We'll get back to that in a second if we have time. Okay. And then the other thing with the plants that I showed, I don't know if you ever watched that documentary that I sent to you, but when they did the, I can't remember exactly.
There's a time lapse of some plants?
No.
No.
This was when they gave a high concentration of nutrients to a mother plant, right? And then they traced through the root system where it sent the nutrients, and it sent them only to her daughter plants only.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There were plants next to it that were the same species. Like there was no competition going on there.
Right. Sending them to your daughters means that you're ensuring the survival chances of your own genetic progeny. That makes evolutionarily the most sense.
Right, but we could also assign people could easily assign things to that.
Yeah, you could assign intentions to it. Yeah, but you don't need to.
And we don't need to with the fish either.
And well, wait, how do we not need to in the case of a fish?
Just because I don't want to lose the question because I'm very dumb. It'll just disappear on me. Actually, I was gonna cite a whole hypothetical, but I think I can answer it much more quickly by asking Shanna a simple question. If you found out that fish feel pain closer to say like a dog feels, like closer to us, would that completely change your perspective?
Yes.
Okay. I was gonna cite like what if it was a dog, but that actually answers it just fine. All right, you guys can continue.
Can I ask something sort of related? I just
I got tips after JD.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. We're gonna go with Maximus, and then we're gonna
go ahead.
Maximus, then we'll bounce back to you, Benny.
Oh, okay. I was gonna comment on the whole fish thing, but does that topic seem over to you guys, or should we just go on to what Benny decides on?
Well, is yours going to stir everything back up?
It would stir everything back up, so I'll let Benny take it.
Go ahead, Benny.
Well, I think that what this is coming down to is cognitive ability. It's not so much that there isn't a pain response, but it's about what is the awareness level of one species versus another. How cognizant are they of their surroundings and of their own internal affairs? And I think that's interesting. I think that's necessary to consider. But then I'd also wonder: is it more immoral to do harm to an intelligent human than a stupid human, or I mean, this human? I think that a human with a very low IQ would still feel pain in pretty much the same way I do. I mean, I think that a very stupid person would. I mean, if you touch them with a hot branding iron or something, their experience would not be terribly different from my own. I mean,
or blind, like Helen Keller, right? Blind, deaf, and dumb. Would it any different with her?
No, I mean she wasn't mentally disabled. She had two disabilities. That's not exactly.
I'm adding that on to what you're saying, like adding that.
Well, I mean that's not exactly what I meant. But I'm just talking about the ability to consider your surroundings and yourself. Someone who is mentally disabled, wouldn't have the cognitive ability to have a conversation like the conversation we're having right now, and yet I think that their pain response would be basically the same as ours. And maybe I'm wrong in that, but I'm wondering if we're missing something by just focusing on cognitive ability rather than considering other factors.
Well, it's not intelligence, right? It's the ability to suffer. It's the capacity to suffer. And we can suffer in ways that other organisms can't. We can suffer more, and we can suffer differently than other organisms can. So, just as we can experience pleasures that other organisms can't, we can experience certain thoughts and certain emotions, right? The range of our emotions is different, extends beyond that of certain other organisms. So we can suffer more and more acutely and in different ways than other organisms. So it's suffering that's relevant here. It's not just pain, and it's certainly not a function of intelligence. That should move us to have moral concern. Intelligence is relevant for whether or not an organism is going to have obligations, for instance.
And I think that what that leads to is that for a more intelligent person is going to have more intellectual needs. They're going to have more ambition. And if you limit a person's ambition, if you take a very ambitious person, an ambitious and intelligent person, and you take away their ability to pursue that which they deem of the highest value, pursuing the career that they want to pursue, or pursuing the types of love interests, or whatever, right? That's sort of higher order needs beyond simple like pain avoidance, right? And so taking that away from a person it would mean something to an intelligent person that it wouldn't mean to an unintelligent person, because that person doesn't have the same needs. Right? They don't have the same ambitions. And so that makes sense. But the bar for pain, I think the bar for pain is pretty low. I mean, you don't need to know that much. You don't need to understand that much to feel pain. And so I can understand where Shannon is coming from. I'm not taking a side. I'm just pointing out that I think we can set the bar for pain pretty low, because most organisms that we know of that we interact with, other than something like a single-celled organism, seem like they can feel pain, even if they can't. Even if we don't really know if they can, something like a fish. So that's all.
Alex, I want you to, I think because you want to respond to this stuff, and then I want to move the conversation forward with a kind of a new topic.
Oh, okay. Where I was going was a little different with the topic anyway. So taking all of these recognitions of our our differences, does that then justify us in saying that we have any such dominion? Would you say that then justifies us in having any such dominion over the creatures? So if we believe ourselves to be more intelligent, and we believe the other creatures to not experience as we do, and we're using that as the standard, does that create any? Does that create dominion essentially? Does that give us dominion?
I would say no. I mean, dominion implies sovereignty. You can do what you will, whatever you want. And my view is no. If you have obligations, then precisely not dominion. It means you have responsibilities, you have duties, you have obligations, and we have rights. But I mean, these are things that are going to restrict and curtail us. Whereas dominion sort of implies you can do whatever the hell you want, right? You have a complete sovereignty over it. And so I think dominion is the wrong word there. I think that dominion, if that's what we mean by dominion, definitely not.
Well, let me ask you a question, because actually we're jumping ahead to another topic that I wanted to bring in. But what is the concept of dominion? This is, I guess, the only real part of this conversation I think that really rolls some theological aspect into. because from the theist viewpoint, and especially in the Christian viewpoint, that they do have dominion over things. And while even Ozzy, you've said that you don't think that that's probably the right way to describe it. Don't we exercise this in the way that we act still? When we take out a bunch of forest or whatever to build a new Walmart, at that point in time we're saying screw the animals that live there. They might die, whatever. We're going to expand because we have the right to expand and go into those areas.
Well, we certainly act as if we have dominion, which is a mistake. I mean, we've long thought that we were other than nature, apart from nature. That we were the gods of the planet, and a lot of religions have sort of ratified this, and this has terrible ramifications. So that people think of themselves as apart from nature, above nature, something between an animal and a god, some kind of ontological angel, that we're only half immersed in nature at best, and so we rule by right and we can do what we want. I mean, we do act this way, and everything I've been describing here is in my view, a recommendation on how we should proceed. I've not been describing or trying to defend how we do proceed. I think we proceed in ways very different from what I've been recommending. We proceed in ways that suggest that we think that the world is ours to do with as we will, and other organisms are here strictly for our amusement and enjoyment, and that we have no obligations to them, and I think that's terrible and ultimately self-destructive.
So balancing kind of like the similar question off of Max here, because as the only theist on the panel, in the Bible it talks about man having dominion over animals, that we can do with whatever we want. How does that?
It better translates to stewardship, not domain, and I would argue that it would better translate under stewardship. Stewardship means inclined to have a responsibility over. God actually gives man stewardship over animals. And also it says in Proverbs that the character of a person can actually be looked upon by how he treats the lowest of creatures. The exact verse I forget, but there is a call for human beings to actually act preferable to animal species. I would think that even in ancient Judea, if you saw somebody needlessly kicking his mule, that I think that would be considered a form of cruelty as well. I don't think that there would be too huge a gap over that.
Especially if it talks.
Especially, it usually talks. There was only one case of that, and that's because it was God using his power to get it to talk. So it's not because of anything intrinsic in the mule.
Right. So I think, does anybody else want to add on to anything about dominion over animals?
My concepts of dominion fall down because of this idea of sovereignty and such. So when I think dominion over animals, I'm forced to picture something like Aquaman, where you have actual control over the animals. I don't think you can ever have any sort of sovereign dominion in that sense.
When you're swimming off the coast of Australia,
from the theology.
Sorry, I was going to say when you're swimming off the coast of Australia, try to tell the shark that you have dominion over them.
Right, exactly. So in that sort of sense, I don't think it has much in the way of meaning. But if we're going to extend dominion to mean a sort of what's the word? Like a secondary control, like as you were saying, like we burn down a forest, we are taking dominion over the land essentially, and acting upon it with little regard. And I think that's as close as we can come. And that's all I was going to say. Like the actual theological side to it doesn't make much sense, and the idea of stewardship, I think, holds problems in itself. But that's another topic.
So the last two topics that I kind of want to hit on tonight is in what responsibilities do we have when dealing with the future and with.
Before going on to that, could I just make one last statement?
Sure.
And I actually looked up the proverb. It's Proverbs 12:10. It says, "The righteous care for the needs of their animals, but the kindest acts of the wicked are cruel." That's what I was thinking of. So, yeah. And, of course, stewardship, I think, contrasts heavily from dominion because stewardship implies that human beings have some kind of care or responsibility to animals in the sense of taking care of the land and whatnot. Because even to take care of animals requires some kind of stewardship and maintaining of a good ecology or environment. So that's just where I wanted to end.
Okay. I didn't know that one. Actually, I wasn't aware of that verse. So, talking about ethics and regarding what we can foresee in the future and what we've seen in the past, and starting off with the past tradition, things like the running of the bulls, things like bullfights. These are still things that some cultures hold in high regard due to tradition. Now, do you think that we've grown to a point that this is stuff that we should be condemning? Do you think that this is the type of do we think that we're obligated now to step in and say, listen, this is behavior that we don't approve of?
I would say that we do already. The internet has provided that gateway for everyone to speak their piece about certain topics. The difficulty, I should say, comes in convincing those involved to value, you essentially value these morals over their traditions. But I think most certainly we are already in the process of doing that. A good example would be Russia during the Olympics when we had the massive uprising because they were speaking out against gays. So I think it's already in effect.
All right. Benny, I know you kind of brought that up. How do you feel about things that are considered traditional like that?
It's tough. I mean, there are other examples like the tribal whaling rights, I think in the U.S. and Canada, and maybe also Japan. I'm not sure if it's tribal in Japan or if it's just the Japanese people do it. But the argument brought up is, this is our culture, this is our tradition, our heritage goes back thousands of years. Who are you to tell us we can't? And we know from our religious discussions that the argument from tradition is a fallacy. I mean, using tradition as a way of saying this is right because it's old is not a valid argument. I mean, just because a practice is old, a morally incorrect practice could be old. So, we need to be able to make these judgments, but it's tough. It's really tough to say, like, who's to say to the Inuit Indians, living in the Arctic or near the Arctic, that they can't do these things. So, I mean, I don't really know how to deal with that problem, but I did want to point it out. Sorry, I can't say more.
No, that's fine. I'm surprised that more people don't want to speak up on this. I mean, I think that this is stuff that we should do. We should be in a position now where that we should be condemning this action openly in that way. But
well, I would agree. I mean, there are traditional hunting practices that I think are horrific. I mean, supposing that there were people still driving herds of bison off of cliffs and saying, this is just the way we do things. This is the way our people have always done this. We'd be up in arms. We'd say, no, enough of that, right? And that's that'd be a more egregious case if that were going on. I'm not aware that goes on anywhere, but if that were still going on, we would have something to say about it. And so I think that the fact that something has been going on traditionally is not a good reason to continue doing it. But the objection for has to be, well, what you're doing is cruel. What you're doing is inhumane, right? That has to be. You have to be able to establish that is the case. So, I mean, there are Inuit people, for instance, that hunt seals on ice floes and stuff like that, and it looks kind of bloody to us. And it is, but it's actually not any bloodier than going out and hunting a deer with a gun or fishing or something like that. Although I think a seal can feel a lot more agony than a fish can. But the fact that something is gory and bloody, that's purely aesthetic. That's just an aesthetic judgment. That doesn't make it moral or immoral, right? What's morally relevant is whether you're doing something that is generating very avoidable suffering, right? I mean, I think the best arguments against any kind of hunting and would be arguments that cut across all hunting and all fishing, which would be arguments along the line of, as long as we can sustain ourselves and be healthy without resorting to the killing of animals, right? A purely sort of vegetarian or vegan line based on animal welfare, then we shouldn't be doing it. That I think would be the best argument. I think arguments that try to sort of do less than that don't work, and I think even those vegan and vegetarian arguments ultimately are not persuasive to me.
Okay. Now, what about the future? Ethics in the future is that we're getting to a time now where we can artificially create, I guess you could say, meat in a way. We can grow our own protein or whatever way you want to say it. If this becomes something that's possible to us, are we ethically now should we be ethically required to or obligated to start moving down this path, make that our main focus?
Yes, definitely. I'd say so.
Okay, Darius, go ahead.
Because I mean, why do we eat meat now? I'd say it's practical for one, and I'd say killing animals is probably the most. Right now it's the only way to get meat, obviously. That's at least ethical, if you want to call it that. But I think if we have another way to do it that doesn't involve killing them, even if it's humane, I'd say why not? Wouldn't that create another obligation towards animals, and another obligation to not kill them? I mean, we have all these obligations to not torture them or to humanely kill them. But I'm just wondering that if the event comes where we do end up getting lab-grown meat, why don't we have an obligation not to kill them? I mean, it seems sort of odd that we have obligations to not torture them, but we don't have an obligation to not kill them. Especially, it would seem necessary to me if we could grow meat in a lab. I think that would be amazing.
Yeah, I could address that if you want, Darius, about the an obligation not to harm and an obligation not to kill. Precisely because some animals, like a fish, I think can suffer. Shanna will challenge me on that. Okay, but let's pick another animal. Let's an octopus.
You need to pick another animal, Oz.
How about an octopus? Okay, I think an octopus can feel fear. I don't know. Maybe you think they can't. I don't know. Pick another animal. Pick some other. A dolphin. I don't know. Okay.
We can't kill dolphins anyway, I don't think.
Okay, pick a cat or a dog. Okay, or a fox. Let's do a fox. Okay.
I'm just saying, I'm going to need an argument for that. Okay.
Okay. All right. Let's do a fox. Okay. I think a fox can suffer, and so we have an obligation to whatever you're going to do to a fox, you better not be hurting it. It's wrong to hurt a fox without a good reason. Okay. You need a good reason. Okay. Now, wanting to eat an animal, I think, is a good reason to kill an animal. Okay, but wait a minute. How could you justify killing an animal, but it's wrong to hurt it? And normally we think, well, that seems kind of odd because, any argument you could marshal against hurting me could be applied more strongly as an argument against killing me, right? But I can actually anticipate my own death. I have plans. They can be frustrated, right? You can wrong me by killing me in ways that you can't wrong a fox, okay? And the fact that a fox can't fear its own mortality, can't suffer the thought of its own mortality and its own premature death. The fact that it doesn't have life plans that are going to be frustrated and ruined if its life is ended prematurely is a difference that makes a difference. These are lives that really are less worth living, and that's going to shock some people, but I think that there are lives that are less. These are lives that you wouldn't want to live, right? I wouldn't want to be a fox. Okay, why? That would just not be as rich a life. I wouldn't care if I died. Literally, if I was a fox, I wouldn't care if I died. I wouldn't be worried about death. I would be worried about being injured. I would be
But you would-
I would be worried about being eaten by a predator because I would be naturally terrified. But I wouldn't be worried about, oh shoot, I'm going to die. I need to watch what I eat. I need to behave differently. I need to behave in ways that will prolong my life. No, a fox can't even have those thoughts. It doesn't have those thoughts. It doesn't have those concerns. And so I think it's actually possible to say we have an obligation not to make it suffer, but we don't have an obligation to prolong its life. Right? I think we don't necessarily have an obligation to prolong its life, and if we have reasons to end its life, well then that's it. We can end its life, which is why I think we can and do and always have. Now, with respect to synthetic meat, that's an interesting one though, because although I don't have a reason to end its life, if I have a way of producing meat that is identical. I mean, the idea of synthetic meat makes everyone kind of queasy, but let's say that we could produce synthetic meat that was indistinguishable. It was just molecule for molecule identical to naturally produced meat. Okay, if we could produce that, it was identical in flavor and nutritional value and in every respect, just as a thought experiment, let's say we could do that, then I think, yeah, there'd be no reason to harm an animal. And of course, killing animals involves harming them, right? It almost always involves some pain, some discomfort, and it certainly involves interfering in their lives needlessly to house them and corral them or crate them or whatever it is that we're doing. And so whatever we do, we want to avoid interfering in ways that they would object to, okay, wherever you can. Okay, unless you have a reason why you really should, and I think if we really did have synthetic meat, I think that would take away just about every reason we have for killing animals, short of recreational ones. But then I think killing animals for recreation or harming animals for recreation is a bad way to recreate, and I think your moral sensibilities have to be sort of a little bit canted for you to not care about an animal suffering just because it provides you with recreation.
It's interesting just to comment about what you said, Ozzy, is that I know a lot of people would look at synthetic meat and they'd snub their nose at it and think it would taste disgusting, and I get that, but at the same time, if you go to say McDonald's, the food there is not even really food anymore. It's so processed, it's ridiculous. So you're essentially eating kind of the same thing.
Canada's McDonald's is actually a lot better and well regulated than America's McDonald's. Not saying it's the best thing ever, but we don't have that pinkish meat you found in the news.
Yeah, you got the pink slime.
Yeah,
the pink slime thing.
Yeah, slightly off topic. The beef that McDonald's gets is generally dependent on the country that it's in. So if you have better beef in your country, you're going to end up with better quality burgers. But that's a topic for
every country has its own health standards. I think, like in Japan, you get real burgers at McDonald's.
Yeah, and they're also a little more expensive.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah. But Benny or Alex, did you guys want to weigh in on the topic of the synthetic meats as well?
I do, but Darius has to leave, so he has one last thing he wanted to say.
So Darius, thank you very much for joining us. Sorry we're so a little bit later, but if you have a last statement that you want to put out, feel free to do it now.
So I just want to clarify, Ozzy, did you say that if we could make meat that was identical, would that make killing animals unnecessary, so to say?
If we could actually do it and it were affordable and feasible and all of that, then I couldn't think of any reason why one should go out and end the life of an animal.
But since we are omnivores, we don't need to eat meat anyway. We can eat vegetables. So already, isn't killing animals already unnecessary?
No, I don't think it's unnecessary, but I don't think it has to do with necessity either. I mean, liking what you eat matters. It's one of the pleasures of life. I think it actually matters, so I don't think I have to sort of restrict myself to a vegan diet just because it's possible to do so. I don't think I have a moral obligation to do that. I think it's a super derogatory act. But
we need protein from, especially like red meat. We need that. That's a need.
But if we can synthetically create it.
Right now, actually, there are, at least to my knowledge, very few. There are very few ways of getting, for example, vitamin B12. That is kind of the ones that I remember, and to date, I don't think I know of an alternative. Although, if anyone on YouTube does know of an alternative that is just as viable as taking it directly from the meat, please let me know, because cereals are not the same thing.
Red Bull gets you B12.
Injections of B12 give you B12.
I just was going to address the. Hey, have a good night, Darius.
Yeah, thanks,
Good night,
man. See you all later. Have a great night, guys.
Take care.
Later.
About the meat, the stem cell meat. I mean, I made a comment in the side chat about the stem cell meat, which is gross. But I mean, if it works, it works, I guess. I really, it's hard to imagine where we're going as far as the direction of technology. We have 3D printers that I expect, within 5 or 10 years to be doing amazing things that are going to blow all our minds. We could be 3D printing all our food for all we know. It's actually possible that we could be doing this. So these problems could actually be solved. They really could be solved. And people living 100 years from now could be living a life that we would not even recognize at all. And hopefully they will be, because that's just my optimism speaking. But it goes back to the Alex, you got a little bit of noise going on. But we talked about slavery. I think it was last week. We talked about the ethics of slavery, and I think it's really interesting. It's easy for us now, living when we do and where we do, to say, oh, slavery is obviously wrong, because we live in a time where we don't stand to benefit from it. We're not in a position where we have no skin in the game, right? It's not really an issue that's close to our hearts, unless you're related to someone who. I mean, there are still slaves on Earth today, but most of us don't know those people. Most of us will never meet those people. So it's just this very distant-seeming thing that we have no problem condemning. But then it's a little different when something actually affects you. When we have these moral questions, like questions regarding meat eating, that you actually might have to sacrifice something. I mean, it's a different question asking somebody, is it moral to eat meat when they don't even have an opportunity to eat meat? People 100 years from now might not even have the opportunity, but they might have synthesized food that tastes just the same, and it's no different to them. And then they would look at us. They'd look back 100 years in the past and say, "You people are barbarians. Why don't you just eat the synthetic shit?" But I mean, we don't have that option right now, right? I mean, they will have options we don't have, and it will give them a certain moral perspective that we don't have. And go ahead, Max.
Just to address what you said. You made 2 points. The first point is this kind of appeal to what future generations might think of us. And yeah, that is important. Looking back on our slave-owning past, it's hard to believe that they ever did that, and for good reason. Human beings, as far as we know, do have rights, slave or not. There were probably slaves who were crying at night thinking of the daughter who was sold off by a cruel slave master, feeling the most broadest of existential pains. I don't know of any animal that yet does it, but with regards to maybe this notion of progressivism we have, where, well, there's all these movements currently that seem unpopular or untenable, but what if in the future that becomes the way a society veers off? And yeah, that does happen at times, but there are also movements who try to progress at given societies that don't get anywhere, that might try to seem progressive as well. For example, and I really hate to say this because I don't mean to equate vegetarian or animal rights with this group because it's not all the same. People who are arguing for animal rights have a much stronger case, but people who were a part of the organization of NAMBLA also protested for their rights to engage in sexual relationships with people of a certain age group. They thought the age range should be drastically reduced to a point where they thought that the consenting age should have been 12, for example. Now, of course, this movement never progressed anywhere, nor will it ever progress anywhere. But at the same time, all we can do is really judge things in the here and now. I don't really see a need to appeal to what future generations might think of us, because currently we're having the debate today whether or not this is a viable issue. And if I could help being even the opposition, I think that is something to go by. Although I hope as the opposition I'm making good points that at least my kids would have to stop and think twice about when they think, oh, why did Daddy ever support meat eating? It's such a barbaric act. I at least want that to be a point whenever I go on to any side of a discussion or issue.
Well, now that we've moved on to the topic of NAMBLA, I think I'm going to close the show down. Because at that point in time, we're officially off topic. Yeah, so any airing of grievances, closing statements, feel free to go ahead. Alex, we'll start with you tonight.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, thank you for having me on, and I'll just sort of end with this. I think it's important to remember when we're talking about animals, there is a distinction between animals that we regard as stock and animals that are kept out in the wild. So if the usage for the stock animals no longer exists, do we have any reason to believe that their populations will not drop to that of other animals on this planet, essentially? Because suddenly the space that we are using for them is no longer required. We need that availability for the growth of our population, and we can now manufacture our own food. What use do we have for them? Does anyone really believe that we'll keep them around, essentially? And if so, I'd be interested in why, but that's another topic. That's after-party stuff. So thank you very much, guys.
Okay, Benny?
Well, I just made a pretty long, statement a few minutes ago, so I'll just say thank you for hosting once again, Saka. It's been a really fun show, and thanks everybody else, and good night all.
Okay, Kevin.
Well, I could make a lot of points, but I'll just keep it short. This is a really good discussion. I have a lot more to say, but I guess we'll talk about that some other time. So next,
Maximus.
I just want to say I'm kind of getting a little feedback in the group chat, but again, I want to say there was a huge difference. All I was doing by bringing that example up was simply saying not all movements that say that they're progressive and are going to get us to a better, more progressive future are necessarily going to be the right position. All I'm saying. But
I get you. We're just poking fun.
Okay. As long as we're just poking fun. I just want to say thanks for a terrific hangout. Darius, thank you for, I know you're not here, but if you're ever catching the rewind, thank you for bringing this topic up. It was really fun and nice change in pace from our usual whether or not God is a horrible person discussion.
Oh, yeah, Ozzy.
Yeah, thank you for this hangout. This was fun. This is, always an interesting topic. So thank you, Benny and Darius, for sort of provoking this discussion. I'm really glad it happened. I'll just reiterate one point, if I may. We live in a rights-based culture. In modern liberal democratic societies, we're very preoccupied with the preservation and protection of our rights and the expansion of our rights. And consequently, when we want to safeguard the well-being of something, we have a tendency to immediately think in terms of rights that trump other considerations. But you don't have to invoke the idiom of rights when it comes to animals. When you talk about rights, I think you invariably end up talking about something that can be not just the bearer of rights, but the bearer of obligations. And I don't think that animals can be rightly said to be the bearers of obligations. And they cannot assert or exercise their rights for the same reason that they don't have any obligations. They don't have the kinds of mental powers that are required for that. But that doesn't mean that we can do anything we want to them. The fact that they don't have rights doesn't mean we don't have obligations and duties to them. We are moral agents. We are capable of anticipating the predictable consequences of our actions upon the well-being of those other organisms and the mental states of those organisms. Even if they are not themselves moral agents, they are nevertheless beings that are of moral concern. So there can be beings that are moral agents, and there are beings that are of moral concern. And I think animals that have certain mental capacities are beings of moral concern. It's exactly as if they had rights. We don't have to confer rights or use that idiom. We have obligations and duties towards them. Thanks very much for that.
Shanna, I gave you, you get to go after Ozzy, so you get the last word and the final word.
Thank you.
Oh, man.
Screw that guy. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. I guess, in my view, people have either forgotten or at least stopped behaving like we're a part of nature. We're not above it. We are nature. And if more of us would act like that and honor that balance that all the other animals and plants seem to have under control, we wouldn't even need to have conversations like this. You know, if we just took what we needed and we did it quick and we did it clean and we ate it and we went on our way, and there weren't people out there abusing animals, and we wouldn't even have to worry about this kind of thing. So that's it, really.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out. I want to thank Darius. He had to leave there a little bit early. This has been a great topic. Actually, I really enjoyed this one compared to the usual ones, which I dread. That's not what I meant. But anyway, everybody, thanks for coming out. We're going to be doing an after show again on Xbox Fiend's channel. Link will be made public eventually. And thanks for watching. Have a good night.
Good night.